The first frost came early that year, silvering the grass and window panes of the scattered homesteads along the Snake River basin. The chill had crept in overnight, soft and silent as regret, and by dawn the world was brittle with cold. In the crooked little house on the edge of a dying field, a boy named Eli watched his breath ghost up toward the rafters. He was 10, lean from hunger, old from grief, and quiet in a way that unnerved most adults. His sister, Junia, lay curled beside him, no more than 7, and still clutching a piece of calico torn from their mother's dress. It had once been yellow like marigolds. Now it was gray with dust and time, like everything else in that house. Their father, Silas Greeley, had been up since before dawn. Eli had heard him moving about downstairs, heard the scrape of the stove, the cough that shook the old man's lungs, and the creak of boots being pulled on. Silas wasn't a cruel man by word. He didn't shout or strike. But his cruelty lay in his silences, in the way he looked past his children as though they were just more failed crops in a long field of disappointments. That morning he hadn't looked at Eli or Junior at all, just said there, be a wagon coming, and they'd best be ready. Eli knew better than to ask questions. They walked 2 miles to the edge of town. Silas's hands, weathered and calloused, never touched the children once. He kept them ahead of him like livestock. The town, if it could be called that, was little more than a handful of buildings squatting low against the wind. A dry goods store, a blacksmith shop, a shuttered church, and a saloon where shadows loitered even in daylight. The wagon waited outside the livery. A wide man sat on the bench, his coat too fine for the mud-caked wheels beneath him. He didn't smile when he saw them, just spat once, nodded at Silas, and gestured to the back. "No," Junia said, her voice a fragile reed in the cold. "I don't want to go." Silas didn't respond. He handed the man something from inside his coat. It wasn't money. Eli saw a glint of silver, a locket, their mother's locket, the one Junia had cried herself sick over losing. Eli didn't speak either. He just reached for Junia's hand and helped her climb up. They rode west with the stranger, out past the rim of land Eli knew, into a place where trees grew taller and the air smelled of pine and sorrow. The man didn't offer a name. He kept to himself, grumbling when they asked for water, scowling when Junia whimpered at night. It wasn't until the 3rd day, as rain turned the trail to muck, that the man showed his true self. He struck Junia for speaking out of turn. The blow knocked her sideways, blood blooming bright on her lip. Eli didn't think. He launched himself at the man, fists like stones, fury rising like fire from dry grass. The man laughed as he tossed the boy off, but something changed after that. He tied Eli's hands behind his back that night, called him wild dog, and said he'd be lucky to fetch $5 at the mining camp. They were being sold. Eli hadn't understood before, not really, but now the truth sat heavy in his gut. Silas hadn't sent them to a better place. He sold them for coin, for whiskey, for nothing. They reached the mining camp on the 5th day, where men lived in tents and tempers, and the law was something that only arrived too late. But it wasn't a miner who stopped the trade. It was a stranger, tall in a duster the color of old smoke, his face half hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't say a word when he saw the children, just stepped between them and the man with the wagon. A colt rested on his hip. Another was slung across his back, and something in the stillness of him made even the loudest men fall silent. "You don't want this trouble," the wagon man said, trying for a sneer. The stranger didn't blink. "Take your hands off them." And just like that, everything began to change. But that's not the end of the story. It's just where it begins. The man didn't move right away. He glanced toward the mining camp, where a few onlookers leaned against posts or poked their heads from tents. It was too early for much fuss, the sun not yet high, but word had a way of traveling quick in places where decency was scarce and diversion rare. The wagon man's fingers hovered near his belt. Eli watched, heart drumming, his wrists rubbed raw from rope. Junia stood frozen beside him, one cheek dark with bruising, her breath hitching but silent. The stranger's hand never strayed near his gun. "You deaf," he said again, voice low and edged with something that didn't belong to this world of rusted picks and broken men. "I said take your hands off them." The wagon man hesitated, but only a breath too long. There was a blur of motion, a sound like thunder cracked too close to the ear, and then he was on his knees, clutching a wrist that no longer held shape. The pistol he'd drawn clattered to the dirt. The children didn't move, neither did the stranger. He stood like a pine rooted deep, one boot forward, eyes calm. "I ain't gonna tell you again," he said. The wagon man swore, face gone the color of lard. He stumbled to his feet and backed off, cradling the ruined hand. "Ain't worth this," he muttered, spitting blood. "Take the brats, then. See what good they do you." He left them in the dust, and the stranger didn't look back once. For a long time, no one spoke. The stranger crouched, cut Eli's bindings with a small blade, and looked him full in the face. His eyes were gray, not like the sky, but like river stones pulled smooth by time and current. "You got names?" he asked. Eli answered for both of them, Eli and Junia Greeley. He gave a slight nod. "Call me Dane." Dane didn't ask questions. He didn't tell them where he was going or what he planned. He just led them away from the camp, up into the foothills where the pines grew thick and the air tasted clean. They walked till Junia's legs gave out, then he carried her without comment, slung against his chest like something sacred. By dusk they reached a small cabin hidden between ridges, half swallowed by brush. It wasn't much, one room, a cold hearth, a cot stripped of bedding, but it stood and it was quiet and no one came looking. Dane lit a fire with practiced hands. He gave them water, hard bread, and a blanket that smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. He didn't ask what had happened, and they didn't offer. That night, as Junia slept curled against her brother, Eli sat close to the flames and studied their rescuer in the shifting light. There were old scars across Dane's knuckles. A notch taken from one ear. He moved like someone who'd lived in too many dangerous places, too long. But when he looked at Junia, it wasn't pity in his eyes. It was something quieter. Recognition, maybe, or memory. "You going to leave us?" Eli asked. Dane didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, added another log to the fire. "Not tonight." Outside, wind sighed through the trees. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, its voice lonely and thin. "Why'd you help us?" Eli asked. Dane stared into the fire. "Because I didn't once," he said softly, "and I still hear the sound they made when I turned away." Eli didn't understand, not fully. But something in the man's voice made him go still inside. They stayed there 3 nights. Dane hunted rabbits, showed Eli how to snare them, how to skin them clean. He taught Junia how to tell which berries were safe, how to find water by the shape of the land. He spoke little, but never sharply. There was a gentleness in his movements that belied the hard set of his jaw. On the 4th day, they heard riders. Dane had gone still before the sound reached Eli's ears. He motioned for silence, eyes narrowing. Then he rose, slow as a shadow, and stepped out with the rifle in hand. 2 men rode into view, one with a badge pinned crooked on his coat, the other wearing the wide grin of someone who thinks trouble's a sport. Eli didn't know them, but Junia whimpered and buried her face in his side. The man with the badge dismounted. "Heard tell you took something didn't belong to you," he said, voice like gravel and molasses. "A couple of kids, from a legitimate sale." Dane didn't flinch. "You think children can be sold?" The deputy's grin faded. "You interfering with business, mister. That makes you a problem." Dane didn't answer, but when the guns came up, he moved. And when it was over, the snow around the cabin drank deep. Junia cried for the first time in days. Eli stood frozen, the wind hard against his skin, staring at the bodies on the ground. Dane wiped the blood from his hands with a cloth he burned afterward. "I didn't want that," he said quietly, "but some men only understand final words." They left that place the next morning. There was no more safety in it. But safety, Eli was learning, had never been a place. It was a person who stood between you and the dark, even when they had no reason to. They headed north, following the ridgeline, and the wilderness opened its throat. The journey had only just begun. The high country opened slow and vast before them, the kind of land that kept secrets buried in snowdrifts and ravines. Dane led without a map, as if the pine-slick hills and shale-cracked passes spoke to him in a language long forgotten by the world below. Eli followed with his head down and eyes sharp. Junia rode sometimes on Dane's horse, sometimes in Eli's arms when the slope turned too steep or her small feet too blistered. They saw no other travelers, only elk tracks and bear scat, the occasional hawk circling above like a sentinel. The cold settled deep into their bones, but Dane showed them how to stay dry, how to dig into windbreaks, how to make a linta from pine boughs and hope. It was on the seventh night, under a sky thick with stars and silence, that Eli asked the question he'd been swallowing. "Are you going to keep us?" Dane looked over the flames at him. He didn't smile. He rarely did. But something gentled his face. "You're not dogs," he said. "You're not cargo." Junia stirred, half asleep beside him. "Then what are we?" He laid another stick into the fire. "You're yours now. But if you want to come with me, I won't leave you." It wasn't a promise dressed in grand words, just truth, spoken like a man who knew what it meant to be left behind. They crossed into Montana territory by the end of the week, where the land grew harsher, the days shorter, and snow no longer waited for permission. Dane found work on a remote trapper's route, hauling skins, sharpening steel, trading furs for coffee and flour, and the kind of boots that didn't split at the seam. No one asked about the children. In these parts, questions were a kind of currency folks couldn't afford to spend. Junia started to laugh again, little bursts at first, like a brook just beginning to thaw. She followed Dane like a pup, trying to match his long stride, mimicking the way he scanned tree lines. Eli began carving. Bits of wood turned to birds, fish, once even a small likeness of Dane that he buried beneath the firewood when no one was looking. They wintered in a valley cut between two ridges, a place Dane called Elk Hollow. There was an abandoned trapper's cabin there, roof sagging but dry, and a spring that still flowed under the ice. They patched the gaps with bark and wool. Dane smoked meat, taught them to mend buckskin. Life became a rhythm, not without hardship, but no longer ruled by fear. One morning, just before the thaw, Junia woke coughing blood. It came sudden without warning. Her face was pale, lips rimmed with blue. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink. Eli panicked, shouting her name, shaking her thin shoulders until Dane pulled him back. "She needs warmth," Dane said, voice tight. "And broth." But Eli saw it in his eyes, the same look Sila's had when their mother passed, quick and cruel from fever. A quiet sort of dread. For 2 days, Dane sat by her, holding a damp cloth to her brow, whispering stories in a voice Eli had never heard. He told her about a dog he'd had as a boy, a black one with a torn ear. About a river in Tennessee that glowed with fireflies. About a girl named Rose who used to leave wildflowers in his coat pocket before the war came and took everything soft. "She's gonna die," Eli whispered that night, standing in the doorway looking out at the snow. Dane came to stand beside him. "No," he said. "How do you know?" "Because I've buried too many good things. And this time I won't." At dawn, Dane saddled the horse and rode out. Eli sat by Junia, spooning broth between her cracked lips, listening to the wind rattle the roof like bones in a tin. Dane returned 3 nights later with a woman, native, old, wrapped in layers of beaded cloth and carrying a bundle of roots and herbs. She said nothing to Eli, only looked at Junia and nodded once. Then she got to work. Eli sat outside, fists clenched, listening to her chant low under her breath, to the fire hiss, to Junia's soft moans. Dane sat beside him, not speaking. When dawn came again, Junia was asleep, her breathing steady. Her skin no longer gray. The woman stood at the threshold, nodded at Dane, and walked back into the trees without asking for thanks. "She come from a village near Crow Creek," Dane said. "Used to ride with a man I knew. Saved my life once." Eli didn't ask how. Some stories lived best in the unsaid. The thaw came slow. Rivers swelled, trees turned slick with rain. Eli chopped wood, helped Dane with traps. Junia began singing to herself when she thought no one was listening. But the quiet wouldn't last. That spring, trouble came down from the north in the form of riders looking for a man who'd gunned down a deputy. Word traveled far, even in the wild. They wore red sashes and rode under the name of a sheriff from Billings, a man whose badge weighed heavy and whose sense of justice bent sharp toward profit. There was a bounty on Dane. $50 dead, 75 alive. They came through Elk Hollow with torches and rifles, and that's when Eli learned what it meant to fight for a place you, finally begun to believe was home. The first sign was smoke. Not from their chimney, but from down valley, dark, rising in a twisted column against the new green of spring. Dane was gone that morning, out checking his snares. Eli stood at the edge of the tree line, Junia behind him, clutching his hand so tight her knuckles went white. "They're burning something," she whispered. "Not something," Eli said. "Someone's looking." By the time Dane returned, his face was already set like stone. He came on foot, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning the ridgeline like he expected it to open fire. "We got ours," he said, "maybe less." He didn't tell them to run. He didn't send them into the trees with whispered instructions. Instead, he knelt, pulled a tin box from beneath the hearth, and opened it. Inside was a scatter of cartridges, a map, and a folded strip of blue cloth, military issue, stained and threadbare. "I rode with the 12th Infantry," he said, not quite looking at either of them. "But that ain't who I am now. Just so you know." He handed Eli a knife, not too large, bone-handled, worn smooth with time. "You remember what I showed you?" Eli nodded. Dane stood, fastened his holster, slung the rifle higher. "Good." They didn't wait. They packed light, just what they could carry in a sack and Dane's saddlebags. Junia was lifted onto the horse, her face buried against the mane. Eli walked behind, knife tucked into his belt, eyes wide. They made it 5 miles before the riders caught their scent. 6 men, hard-faced, spurred, and loaded with iron. They came through the forest like wolves, torches in hand, calling Dane's name like it was a curse. Dane didn't run. He turned, planted his boots in the muddy trail, and fired a warning shot into the air. "I don't want blood," he called. A voice returned, rough and mocking. "Then lie down and we'll make it quick." Eli felt something rise in his chest. Fear, yes, but something else too. A tightness, a heat, a refusal. Dane knelt beside him. "Take your sister, circle south, keep the wind at your back." "I won't leave you." "You have to. You're the one thing I can't replace." Eli wanted to argue, but he saw it in Dane's face, the same steadiness that had carried them through cold and hunger and sickness. This was a man who didn't ask for loyalty. He gave it and expected you to survive, so Eli did what he was told. They slipped into the trees while the riders fanned out. Junia clung to him, her breath loud in the hush of pine needles. They moved like ghosts, swift and low, until gunfire split the forest. 1 shot, then 2, then silence. Eli froze. Junia looked up at him. "Is he?" "No," Eli said, though he had no way to know. They waited till nightfall, curled beneath a rock outcrop, hidden by moss and fog. Eli didn't sleep. He watched the stars blink into being and listened for footsteps that never came. At dawn, they crept back. The trail was scorched, trees blackened by fire. Eli moved slow, each step a prayer, the knife tight in his fist. Then he saw the first body, face down, red sash, blood soaked into the soil like rain, another and then Dane, leaning against a stump, one leg stretched out, wrapped in torn cloth. His face was pale, jaw clenched, rifle still gripped in his hands. He looked up when he heard them. "You're late," he said. Junia ran to him, crying without sound, burying her face in his coat. Eli stood frozen. "You're hurt." "Only my leg. Bullet grazed the bone. Won't be dancing any time soon." Eli laughed, short and hard and shaking. "You don't dance." "Good thing," Dane said, exhaling slow. They buried the men in silence, marked the graves with stones. Dane wouldn't let Eli touch a shovel. He worked through the pain, jaw locked, sweat beading on his brow. "Why didn't you run?" Eli asked when it was done. "Because there's some things you can't run from, and some you shouldn't." The wound festered. By the 3rd day, Dane was fevered, drifting in and out of speech. Eli stayed at his side, cooling his brow, changing the dressing, trying to recall every herb the old woman had used. Junia knelt beside him once, whispering soft. "Don't go." Dane opened his eyes. "Not yet." Eli found a trapper, post 2 days south, brought back medicine, bandages, a mule. The man there didn't ask why a boy traveled alone. Just handed over what he needed and took payment in silence. Dane lived, slowly, stubbornly. Spring ripened into early summer. The land softened, birds returned, trees thickened with green. And something in Eli's chest loosened, a knot he hadn't known was there. They didn't speak of the riders again, or the bounty, or the blood. But one evening, as fireflies blinked low in the grass, Dane looked at Eli across the fire and said, You saved me." Eli shook his head. "You saved us first." Dane's voice was quiet. "You gave me something worth staying for." And for the first time, Eli saw what a home might look like. Not a roof or a room, but a circle of firelight, a sister asleep beside you, and a man who had chosen, again and again, not to leave. The road behind them was ashes, but the road ahead was open, and they would walk it together. The summer came in slow and golden, and with it, the kind of quiet that doesn't make demands. The valley held them like a deep breath, soft hills blooming with wildflowers, deer tracks winding through damp earth, the hush of bees thick in the air. Eli took to rising before dawn, fetching water from the spring, watching the first light spill across Junia's sleeping face. She had begun to hum again, not always the same tune, just little bits of sound stitched through the day like birdsong. Dane still limped. He leaned on a carved cane, hand-etched by Eli from a length of pine. The wound had knitted but deep, the kind that marked a man's step for life. He didn't complain. He split logs with one hand, taught Junia how to throw a small hatchet, and showed Eli how to read the sky for storms. They started building, not just repairs, but something new, an extra room, squared logs notched with care, a linta for the mule, a proper chimney to hold the smoke. Eli learned the rhythm of hammer and saw, the weight of decisions, the slow patience of making something that could last. Dane let him lead sometimes, gave him space to fail, and never once raised his voice when he did. "I never thought I'd stay one place," Dane said one afternoon, watching Junia hang cloth to dry on a line strung between two pines. "Why now?" Eli asked. Dane ran a hand along the beam they'd just set, the grain catching sun. "Because you were worth stopping for." Eli didn't reply. He didn't need to. The truth sat heavy and warm between them, like bread left rising in a quiet kitchen. But peace, they were learning, was a thing you had to tend like fire. Let it go unattended, and it'd flicker out or grow wild, burning more than it lit. In late August, a man came riding through the pass. He wore no badge, no red sash. He carried a ledger, and his coat was stitched with fine thread, too fine for these hills. He claimed he was from Helena, from the court that still held Silas Greeley's name on record. He wanted the children back. Said their father had filed a complaint, claimed the man who'd taken them was a drifter, a criminal, that they'd been stolen from his rightful custody. Dane stood on the porch, hand on his cane, eyes steady. Their father sold them. "I've got no papers, but I've got truth, and I'll stand by it." The man looked past him to Eli, to Junia, who stood just inside the doorway. "I'll be back with orders," he said. "And mend." He left with the wind, hooves cracking the dry trail like thunder. That night the valley felt too quiet. Even the fire seemed to burn low, uncertain. "Will they take us?" Junia asked, curled between the blankets, voice small. "No," Dane said. Eli looked at him. "How can you be sure?" "Because I'll burn the whole world before I let them." But Eli saw the wear in Dane's shoulders, the way his hand trembled slightly as he added wood to the stove. They couldn't outgun a court. Couldn't outrun a system built to never ask the right questions. So Eli wrote a letter. He rode to the trapper's post before sunrise, paid the old man a coin to send it with the next wagon east. He didn't say what was in it. Only watched it vanish down the trail, dust rising behind. Then they waited. Days passed. The ledger man returned, this time with two men in gray coats and a paper marked with ink and wax. They stood in the yard, eyes hard, voices full of authority. "We're here for the children." Junia hid behind Dane, who did not move. Eli stepped forward. "You can't have us." The man smirked. "That's not up to you." But before they could speak again, another rider came, tired, mud-splattered, but fast. She dismounted without a word and handed the gray-coated man a sealed document. He read it. His jaw tightened. Then he spat once and walked away. Eli watched him go, heart hammering. "What happened?" Dane asked the rider. She tipped her hat. "That boy of yours sent a letter, reached a woman in Helena, said she was kin of your late wife. Had enough pull with the magistrate to null the old man's claim." She looked at Eli. "Smart thing you did." Eli didn't speak. He just nodded, a lump too large to swallow rising in his throat. That night they sat by the fire without fear. Dane reached out, placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. You gave us roots, he said. Now we grow. Junia curled close, safe in the warmth of wood and wool and silence. The world outside might come again, with claws or coins, but here, between the trees, beneath the stars, they had chosen each other. And that choice, Eli was beginning to understand, was stronger than blood or law. It was home. The first snow came quiet, drifting soft over the peaks like someone laying a quilt over tired shoulders. It gathered in the bends of the roof, settled on fence rails, turned the creek into a line of silver sleeping beneath glass. Winter, in Elk Hollow, wasn't the enemy it once had been. It brought stillness, yes, and a kind of bone-deep chill, but it also brought closeness, stories by firelight, the scent of stew slow-cooked with care, footsteps tracked in and out, never hurried, always returning. Junia had grown, taller now. Her hair longer, less tangled. She could read simple words, taught slowly by Dane's careful hand and Eli's steady patience. She wrote her name in charcoal across the beams of her bedroom wall and said she'd never forget it again. Eli had grown too. His shoulders had widened, his voice begun to deepen like the woods in twilight. He worked the land beside Dane, mended fences, built with intention. He carved more than birds now, boxes, tools, once even a flute for Junia that wheezed off-key but made her laugh until her belly ached. One morning, before the frost had burned off, Dane handed Eli a piece of leather and a key. "You're old enough now," he said. "That shed by the East Ridge, I've kept it locked for years." Eli took the key without question. He knew enough by now not to press before a man was ready. Inside the shed, he found what was left of a past Dane had never spoken fully of. A uniform folded and stiff, a journal, a photograph brittle with age of a woman with a braid like Junia's, her hand resting on a man's arm, Dane's, younger, face unscarred by time or sorrow. He didn't ask, just returned to the house, placed the key back on the nail, and said, "She was beautiful." Dane didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "She loved me until the world turned sharp." That night, Junia asked Dane to braid her hair like the woman in the picture. And he did, hands gentle, voice soft with memory. Come spring, the garden bloomed stronger than it ever had. Bees thrived, the mule had a foal, wild geese returned, and Dane watched them pass overhead with something like peace in his eyes. They didn't speak of Sela's Greeley. The law never came back. Word must have spread that the children were no longer his to name. He became a ghost, a shadow in Eli's mind, dimmed by time and covered over by better things. Sometimes Dane would take Junior into the hills, just the two of them, and come back with stories of eagle sightings, bear tracks, and the echoes of owls. Other times, he and Eli would work in silence, side by side, the air between them filled with more trust than words could hold. One evening, while the light was long and gold, Dane sat with a rifle across his knees, cleaning it slow. "I wasn't meant for this," he said. "Family, safety, not after what I've done." "You chose it anyway," Eli replied. "That's what matters." Dane looked at him, really looked, and something in his face, once locked tight, loosened. "You're a better man than I ever was," he said. Eli didn't believe it, but he didn't argue either. Instead, he went back to whittling a piece of wood, shaping it into a bird with wings spread wide. Years passed like that, measured in seasons, in harvests, in Junia's handwriting growing steadier, in Eli's shoulders filling out, in the deeper lines across Dane's face. The valley held them, and one day when the time came and the fire burned low and Dane lay beneath wool and sky and stillness, Eli sat beside him, Junia at his shoulder, and held the old man's hand. Dane didn't speak at the end. He didn't need to. His life had spoken for him. They buried him on the hill where the pines broke open to the sun and wildflowers grew. Junia carved the stone herself, not his name, not dates, just words he'd once said. "Because I didn't once." Afterward they stayed, not because they had to, because they chose to, and every spring the geese returned. Every fall the fire was lit, and home remained not just a place of safety, but a bond once broken, now mended, strong enough to stand the wind. They had been sold like nothing, but someone had seen them, chosen them, and in the long, quiet years that followed, they built something no coin could ever buy.